welcome to the next episode of The Professor and the CEO. I'm Ben Gillam, CEO of ThirdWay Group, and as ever, really excited to spend some time with Rachel this morning and with you guys, the wider audience, to talk about how the worlds of business and academia can come together to advise businesses and employees and employers about how to manage during this crisis, what tools are there to engage with, to actually sort of get through this and come out of it thriving. And today I'm particularly excited because we're talking about the workplace and reconsidering the workplace for post-COVID-19. The workplace is what ThirdWay is all about. So I'm looking forward to sharing some insights on that. So that's it from me as an intro. Rachel?
And hello again, my name is Rachel Doern and I'm a senior lecturer at Goldsmiths, which is part of the University of London, and my research relates to entrepreneurship in times of crisis. So as Ben mentioned, today we're talking all about the workplace, and to kick off, we also wanted to discuss for a period of time the issues around remote working, because I think all of us have some experience, or many of us have more experience now of remote working than ever before, in part as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And although it may seem obvious, just briefly, remote working, of course, refers to working outside of the office, but with the assistance of information and communication technologies. And also historically, it's been referred to by other names, such as telecommuting and virtual work and flex work. So as I mentioned today, we're going to talk about some of these issues in relation to remote working, workspace design in particular, but I'm excited to talk to Ben because Ben's company, ThirdWay, is actually a market leader in terms of workplace design and consultancy. So I think he has a lot of interesting and important things to say and contribute. And also, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, has been going through this experience himself and shifting a lot of his work into the online sphere. So I think my first question for you, Ben, is really, what has it been like so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think my starting position should probably be a confession that as a CEO, I didn't really ever, I wasn't really ever a fan of remote working, particularly working from home. And if I'm being honest, it probably came from not trusting myself to work from home. I probably thought, all I'll do if I work from home is whack on Netflix, order a pizza, and not do anything all day. And I couldn't help but just assume everyone would be the same. So switching to remote working for me has been like an amazing experiment and an amazing learning curve for realizing, oh no, I won't just stay at home and watch Netflix and eat pizza all day. And likewise, that's not what the staff do either. So the switch, what was good for us was it was very seamless from a technology point of view. Like as a business, we'd invested quite heavily in cloud-based platforms, in IT, we've got a good IT team. So everyone sort of instantly was up and running. So that piece was great. There wasn't the tension that I know some businesses struggled with as to, do we have the right platforms for this? Should we be using Zoom? Should we be using Teams? So on and so forth. We just hit it. But then what instantly hit us was actually we can be incredibly efficient at probably 60-70% of activities remotely. We can be just as efficient. Where it starts to fall down is on the creativity, on the collaboration, on the strategy, where you're really, really focusing on sort of trying to drive the business forward. So the day-to-day wasn't impacted. I think the strategy was. I think also, whilst I'm not saying a pandemic's good or a long period away from the office is good, I think the duration of it has been really good, because in the first 4 to 5 weeks, I think if you surveyed 80-90% of people, they were like, this is great. Like I can work from home. I'm enjoying not having the commute. I can be just as effective. But slowly as time's gone on, people have come to realize actually balance is what I need. There's things that have worked really well here and things that haven't. Just touching on that bit, what's the pros and the cons? For me, the biggest con is like not being immersed with what's going on, not overhearing some of the problems that in solving, not having an opportunity to really like thrive and show themselves and sort of show that they can think outside the box. I don't think that's been great. I think the pros have been for all businesses is recognizing we have a changing world and we need to adapt, and we need to look at all departments, all individuals, and tailor make a solution that works for us as a business in a way that most businesses would have ignored if we didn't have something like this crisis.
So maybe just to add to some of the things that you're saying, and looking at the research that's been conducted on remote working generally, but also around COVID-19, but more specific to the former, just in general. I think one of the biggest questions or concerns that organizations have or have had in the past in relation to remote working is, will employees still be productive? So what are the effects on productivity? So will people still be able to effectively apply themselves to their work over a specific period of time with the resources they have available? And the research does suggest that in terms of productivity, that productivity can actually, it depends, that productivity can actually go up if people have fewer interruptions as a result of having more devoted time to focus on their work. But it really depends on the individual as well. So some people have more distractions at home because they are caregivers or otherwise. So I think it also depends. Productivity can also, so it can increase, but it can decrease as well if there are fewer opportunities for interactions. And I think that's especially problematic for new people joining an organization or for individuals who are more junior staff members. So I think that's something that organizations need to take into account. Are there as many opportunities to interact and help people to hone and define their skills? And are there IT resources to support people in these remote working capacities? And I think for organizations, one of the benefits potentially of remote work is being exposed to a wider or a hybrid configuration, remote work and more physical work, is that people are exposing themselves to a wider array of talent. So this idea that perhaps in some ways, it doesn't matter where you live, you don't need to be in physical proximity to a business or in commutable distance to such. So you can source those kinds of individuals. You can source individuals who typically have had maybe more restrictions on their work time as a result of carrying responsibilities, who find it difficult to make the commute and or work within a structured 9 to 5 time frame. So you're opening yourselves up to those individuals and people with mobility issues as well. And I think for individuals, there's some research to suggest that working remotely can be advantageous to the extent that they have more time to focus on their work, less time to commute. They can do all their work in one place. And also they have some flexibility in terms of setting the structure for their working day. But then there are cons as well, of course. And some of those cons might include, and we're seeing this now with the COVID-19 pandemic, that a lot of people are complaining they're doing one meeting after another. So not only is it taking up huge amounts of their time, but actually it's leading to a lot of exhaustion as well. And I think probably our need to carry out a lot of meetings remotely was in part to do with the uncertainty that the COVID-19 crisis was creating, and people were meeting up to sort of alleviate some of the anxiety associated with that. But when you're in meetings all day, it just means that you have more admin and clerical work around that. So you're actually extending your working hours. So that's one thing, sort of extending the working day and leading to exhaustion. And I think you've even said this to me before, Ben, as well, and other people have too. When you're commuting and when you're going from one meeting to the next, you have a little bit of downtime, a little bit of thinking space, a little bit of clarity, and you can also make those work home life boundaries clearer in making the transition into work and the transition back into home. And I think people are losing that now. Some people are. So I think that's an issue for some businesses. Did you want to?
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's really hard to get that balance right, because there's an aspect of home working where you can support people with the home environment, with their family. They can bend their working hours around the family. But then the flip side is, by doing that, you naturally extend the working day for those who don't have that. And so what's, I think, the key term that you used, right, Bingham, was hybrid. You have to look at this and say, what is our organization? What organization are we going to be coming out of this? What individual teams we have? And who are the individuals within those teams? How do we make this work? And what's really fascinating is, there's always sort of been the working from the office, working from home. I think home and office are the words that need to be deleted. It's just, I'm working, I'm doing my job. And there needs to be sort of a seamless aspect to wherever you are. You have the technology, but also the business has created the framework that you can be connected, that you can be engaged, that you can be efficient, you can be productive. And no, there are times where you can do it remotely, times where you need to be physically present with other people. So it's great, but there's loads of stuff to sort of work out, which is very exciting for me and people in our field.
Yeah, and I think another thing to work out, one of the concerns traditionally that organizations have had around remote working is this concern with or fixation on cyber slacking. So this idea that if people are working remotely, if people are at home, that they'll use even more of their time to engage in non-work activities. So doing non-work emails, online shopping, online bookings, and so on. And I'm sure we can all claim to have done some of that, and possibly, a little bit of that is absolutely fine, right? Because people are taking natural breaks anyway, as opposed to sort of working straight through for 8 to 12 hours or what have you. The question is, how much is too much, and is it actually interfering with their work? And if organizations, I think, are really concerned about that, what they can do is do what slightly larger businesses do, and they can start, selecting people, thinking about the people they're recruiting, engage in personality inventories. So with the assistance of occupational psychologists, so they can actually select people who are higher in conscientiousness and agreeableness, because these are personality traits associated with being better able to focus on tasks and focus on the work, and less likely to be susceptible to cyber slacking, for instance. So what do you think about some of these issues around?
I think they're completely understandable, but if I'm being brutally honest, I think it's just poor management. Famous last words, but I've always been quite up for a bit of cyber slacking, even in the office. I don't mind people, doing a bit of Amazon shopping or whatever they've got to do, because I think that's a fair trade-off for how intense the work environment can be. Interestingly for us, what COVID has done is make us incredibly efficient at the start of the day. Like the first hour of the day for the business, there are a number of quick meetings where the managers and the teams agree on what the outcomes of the day should be. And what that does is actually create a really simple framework for every individual to say, I know what I need to achieve today, and therefore I want to fit a bit of exercise in, a bit of cyber slacking in, a bit of me time in. Well, great, because I know what I need to achieve today. And naturally, an organization should have a situation where one day a week, a member of staff probably can have a bit more downtime, and there's probably another day in the week where actually they feel quite stretched, because that's just the natural dynamics of an organization. And I think smaller businesses, I think, have actually dealt with this really well. I think most businesses we work with, 100 people and below, have managed this well. Businesses that have grown into medium-sized companies have got this really well. The corporates we work with still don't quite get this. There's still an overemphasis on presenteeism, even presenteeism on Zoom. It's you're on these calls with 30 people, 20 of them haven't spoken, their cameras aren't on, they're on mute. It's come on, they're not really here. They're not really in the room. It's here just for the sake of it. And I think that managers and organizations need to be braver and start a meeting do you need to be here? If you don't, then don't be. Go and be efficient doing something else. So that's a bit of a rant as well, but I'm quite passionate about that area.
Great. And also just a reminder that if people have any questions, which we'll come to near the end of the session, to please put those questions into the Q&A function. So what do you think that organizations and individuals can do to promote remote working? I mean, some of the things I was thinking of related to the culture of the organization, and to what extent are organizations actually, let's say for those jobs that can be done remotely, what can organizations do? So, I mean, creating a positive culture around beliefs and attitudes in relation to remote work, leading by example. Senior managers can do so, endorsing such activities, but also, of course, providing staff with the necessary tools and necessary technology, I think, to carry out such work is important. And I'm sure you've done this, and I know some of the other organizations I've been speaking to over the last few weeks have as well, but organizations really need to create communication policies as well. So when is it reasonable for my organization to expect that I can answer emails or be receptive to calls or participate in team meetings and otherwise? So when is it reasonable to do so? When is it reasonable to have in-office and out-of-office days as a result? I think we need to be careful with this kind of work, that there's not so much blurring of boundaries, that people are expected to be on call 24/7. And I also think that remote workers themselves need to think about striking a balance between what are dedicated periods of time that I need that are distraction free to just get on with certain things, and what are the periods of time that I am making myself available. And I know this can be very difficult from experience as well, because as someone who's worked in higher education where, you know, I have to go into the office to do certain things, to carry out meetings with students and staff, and I have to do teaching in person, at least historically. But then I can also work at home and answer emails and prepare teaching and do research, those kinds of activities that I feel in some of my roles as an academic, in particular my admin role in dealing with pastoral care and dealing with students, I have to be available by email. So do I leave my email on, or do I, one of the things I do is at certain times of the day I do, of course, and at other times maybe I have devoted time to focusing on a specific task. So I might write out the tasks I have to do at the beginning of the day or the night before and assign a time to that. And I try to, for 30 minutes or so, try to work in an uninterrupted fashion. So I think there are things that organizations can do to make this kind of work flow better, but also there are things that individuals need to be doing as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about what organizations can do, what they may be doing to this kind of work in a more effective fashion.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career, certainly as a business leader, was not understanding that as the business grew, you had to transition from being open to being transparent. I was always like, well, I'm open. If someone comes to me and asks me if they're doing a good job, I'll say yes, I'll say no. Like, if you ask me the future direction of business, I'm here. And that worked up to a certain size, but as we got to a certain level, well, there weren't enough interactions to be open, and therefore, technically, you were closed. So we had to work really hard to become transparent. I'm sorry to say I learned that by mistake, not by actually sort of like learnings. And so what we've worked hard to do, and it's really, really challenging in COVID-19, particularly because it's such a moving feast, particularly at the beginning, like what the government doing, what's lockdown, what does it mean for economics, what does it mean for the economy, what's going to go on in 2021. It's really hard to be as transparent as you want to be because it's just changing all the time. But I would say to any organization, transparency is the key for remote working. Let people know what's expected. Like a term we're starting to use within our business is internal contract. Now, we don't mean we're going to write contracts, but it's between managers, between management and the board. It's okay, what's expected of you, what's expected of me, what's the time frame in which we need to operate. And just having those sort of three simple structures enables us to be transparent and fluid as an organization. And it's always a work in progress. So the advice I'd give business owners is really clear. It's like, give yourself the time, think about what the business needs, give a transparent message, and stick with it, and keep repeating yourself until you get frustrated with yourself that you feel like you're saying the same thing. You think everyone thinks you're an idiot, but you're not. You're actually really giving them clear guidelines on how to operate and how to work. I think that's the best advice for remote working, because you don't have the chance for meaningful, unplanned interactions.
That's right. And I was thinking also a little bit about what kinds of jobs have sort of lent themselves to remote working over the last little while. And I was looking at a couple of surveys that were conducted in the UK more recently and in the United States. And it seems as though professions that lend themselves better to this kind of work might include people, of course, engaged in management and knowledge intensive sectors and business services, that for those organizations, the shift to remote working has been a little bit easier and productivity losses have been less as a result. But then it also means that people working in certain sectors like capital intensive factories, or people working in leisure, people working in hospitality, where your work is so dependent on being in that physical space and interacting with other individuals. There are real challenges for those people. We know many of those individuals have been laid off or furloughed as a result. So it also means that the economic cost, the burden of this pandemic has fallen on not only certain sectors, but certain individuals and people working in less skilled spheres as well. So I mean, I think these are things that we all need to be taking into consideration. I don't know if you want to add anything to that before we...
What's really interesting, the best sort of observation I can give on this is ThirdWay as a business, in that we're best part of 250 staff. We have an architectural team who work a particular way. We have a project management team. We have software engineers. We have telemarketing teams. We have database managers. And one of those jobs and think, well, actually, you're quite head down and process driven. You should be able to work well. Remote jobs, they can. You touched on their personality that excels in that role, doesn't necessarily want to work individually or remotely. They might want to be part of a team. And I think that's like, again, a key component is there is not going to be a one size fits all methodology out of this. what there needs to be is a maturity in businesses to say, who are we? What do we need? What teams do we have? What do they need? Which individuals in those teams need something different? How do we deliver that? And I think, remote and again, office, they're the terms we need to delete, because I think there's been like this really binary relationship historically where the employer goes, okay, great, here's the office, here's where you come, this is where you do your job. And in the last decade, it transitioned beautifully into, hey, we want to create this really engaging, aspiring space for you. But it's still, hey, this is where you come and do your job. And now it needs to be, hey, this is the place you pop into when you need to pop into to help you do your job. And that's the mentality shift that this should bring in. And, we're definitely going to be promoting that through our various channels.
Sounds good. So then I think an obvious question, you sort of alluded to it already, is will remote working stick? Will hybrid working stick? And what have we learned essentially from our experiences over the last few weeks and months as a result of being pushed into this new way of working through COVID-19, and what the implications are as a result for organizations? And again, there are some surveys to suggest more recently that around half of the US and the British population moved to remote working over the last few weeks and months. And of those individuals that are working in that capacity, that 40% or so will continue to do so. And that another 20% in the United States, in any case, will do both. They will work remotely and they will work in the office. So I think there are some indications from reports by McKinsey and others that working entirely in the office every day will go down by 10% in some cases, or so the predictions suggest. Like working remotely will go up, and working in co-working offices might sort of stay at a constant, at least for a period of time, but that remains to be seen. And I think one of the reasons why this kind of hybrid working, or let's say remote working, will stick is that companies have now made certain investments in their staff. Some companies have in certain spheres, certain investments in their staff, certain investments in IT and other forms of equipment, and certain investments in their processes. And I think historically that a lot of people, including yourself, Ben, you mentioned that historically you haven't been for this kind of working necessarily because you weren't sure if it would work, and you might slack off yourself and watch Netflix, etc. That there might be these coordination problems, these issues, and people might not work as effectively. That now some of those issues for some organizations may have been resolved. So I think that's something else to consider. So I think in going forward that some people will continue to work remotely, but other people will need to go back to a physical space, whereas others will adopt a more hybrid form. So I think the next kind of obvious question.
It's a good question, and it's one I've racked my brain with for the last 6 months, and even before that. There's a lot of talk of what's the workplace of the future. I think what COVID has done for me is, you're like, yes, this is new, but hey, a crisis isn't new. Like, we've got loads of data about like what happens in crisis and what happens to businesses. And it's again saying, okay, well, let's not think about this as the office. Let's think about this as a business. What does a business need? Well, a business needs to be profitable. If it's not profitable, it ceases to exist. To be profitable, it needs to be productive. To be productive, they need to engage with their staff and with their clients in the appropriate way. And they need to pick the right tools for that. And the office just so happens to be a tool going to like disappear wholesale. Companies will have to find new ways to be profitable and productive. And therefore, the office environment needs to really, really be about productivity and engagement like never before. So what I actually foresee is not sort of companies reducing their footprint significantly. That might happen in the first instance while people make cost savings. It's actually saying, okay, if we're mature enough to treat all of our staff like individuals remotely, we still want them to be welcome when they come here. And when they come to this place called the office, we need to be able to give them all the tools they need to drop in and make themselves productive. and to be engaged and to collaborate and to drive this business forward. And I keep saying to sort of everyone, it's like, oh, I think the office is dead. It's like, hey, the last 10 years haven't been a dream. In the last 10 years, you will struggle, which doesn't say creating a great environment with a great culture isn't the best tool for engagement. Like, everyone accepts it is. Everyone accepts that that engagement leads to productivity. That won't be lost. The way we go about creating it needs to be different. And I'm really excited that businesses might start to tailor for their staff, for their individuals, for the personality types, for the personas within their organization. And I'm really excited for them to see the benefits it's going to bring to their organization. So it's a very long way of saying, I think what will happen in the office is it will just be tailor-made to the individuals that you'll come in. Hopefully the end experience will be that every office will just be tailored for the individual, that you'll come in, experience every time you come in, and a personalized experience. And that's what businesses should be working towards. And I think people are scared by it. I think that means we have to give our staff everything. It's like, absolutely not. It means to know what your business needs to thrive and to grow and to be productive. And naturally, the staff will be able to engage with that.
Exactly. So I think we're having a few connectivity issues, but I think everyone can hear you, Ben. So hopefully that's okay. So just to add to some of the things you're saying, I completely agree with everything that you mentioned in terms of creating more bespoke office spaces. I think that, and just to sort of backtrack a little bit, I think organizations need to think of this time, even though it's been very difficult, as also an opportunity in terms of their processes to think about what can be done differently, not in terms of just replicating necessarily everything we've done the same in the past. So maybe from an activity and task related perspective, are there certain things that we can do in a more like asynchronous fashion? So there's this terminology, asynchronous activities versus synchronous activities, is coming up a lot in my sphere in higher education, but also in other professional areas as well. So this idea that there are certain activities that people can do on their own versus activities that people do together in a group, whether it's online or in person. So I think, making use of discussion boards, making use of more collaborative documents, making use of, the fact that individuals independently can actually start to brainstorm, and then there are opportunities for people to come together as well. So maybe that then has implications on what the workplace looks like, as Ben and I were chatting about before. So this might mean that there are more breakaway rooms, there are more open spaces, more places for people to collaborate and engage in these kinds of discussions when they do come together. And maybe there are some jobs that can be done remotely, but there are other jobs that need to be done in a hybrid fashion, and other jobs still that can only be done in a physical space. So I think it really depends on the jobs that people are carrying out, but also some of the activities and processes that they're engaged in. So as I mentioned, in terms of what the office space will look like, maybe there are more collaborative spaces, but then also depends on the individuals that are working for you. Not everyone can work at home, and this is a real thing. Not everybody has the space for a second office or otherwise. So a lot of people need to go to work to create that time and that space to engage in work-related activities. So as Ben mentioned, I think creating a more bespoke model for each organization, depending on the tasks and the processes involved and individual needs and skill sets as well. Those kinds of things are really, really important. And then maybe a final thing to say is that when organizations do come together, for those organizations that are engaging in hybrid working or that need to be together all the time, what kinds of things can we do or can organizations do to ensure that people are safe? So what kinds of things have you been discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is key to make sure that people feel comfortable in the environment. If you're not feeling comfortable, you're not going to operate well in any environment. So, the first piece, which we've really sort of been pushing for ourselves and our clients, is stay up to date with government guidelines, and where you can go above and beyond, and really make the messaging, make sure everyone's sort of briefed on what's going on and the measures you're going to. I think the key thing is post that, there's no real physical fixes to this in this crisis. It really is about communicating with people, understanding people are different, going above and beyond, and keep monitoring the situation and advising people as they go. Long term, long term, I don't think anyone should make predictions on it at the moment. I think long term, employers need to be constantly engaging with their staff and educating them on what's safe and what isn't safe. And also hearing back from their staff about how anxious they are, and providing other types of support, not just the physical, providing counselling, providing mentors to speak to, about making people feel comfortable going back to the working environment and secure in their profession and secure in their employment, because there's going to be a lot of anxiety about that. So they're the key areas where I think people should be really focused on at the moment, not just the physical environment.
Okay, great, thank you. And just to answer some of the questions from participants, the first one.
Excellent question. So the answer to that question is, don't go online and find a space calculator. The answer is engage with the right professionals and talk about your organization, about the organization that you aspire to be over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Talk about the different roles in your organization, what type of individuals you need and personality types excel in those roles, and what type of tools you need to give those individuals. And from there, you will arrive at the right space calculation. So it's not a simple answer. And I'm sorry for everyone who wants that simple answer. What I would say is, again, businesses need to be profitable. Businesses to be profitable need to be productive. To be productive, you need to engage. And one of the best ways you can engage with your staff is by creating an amazing environment for them to come into and experience a great culture, and use that as the driver, as opposed to how many extra square feet or fewer square feet you need.
I think that leads in well to the next question as well, also, which is, how can I encourage my staff to return to our office? And do you think I will lose staff if I don't offer a flexible working policy?
Yeah, really, really good question. It's about communication with your organization. People don't leave businesses, they leave managers, is a saying that I quite like. It's really about how you engage with your organization and your managers to make sure that you're listening to your people and meeting their needs. And maybe you should lose people. If people are not fit for the new company you need to become or the new working practices you need, like, a grown-up conversation needs to happen, because they'll be holding you back and you'll be damaging their career as well. So I don't think you should be looking at it as a binary question. I think you should go back to, what does the organization need? What organization are we going to be in 2021 and beyond? What type of individuals do I have, and how do I create the best environment for them, both remotely and physically present? And whether they stay or go is secondary to that. I'm not being flippant about letting people go. I'm just being honest about how a business needs to think about how it survives, how it thrives, and how it really engages with its workforce.
Okay, great. And the last question, I think, is also an equally important to that. The sectors hit hardest during the pandemic have been retail, hospitality, and workplace in commercial real estate. Do you think the workplace industry will be able to bounce back? Do you
So I think splitting them out, I think retail and hospitality were struggling industries before COVID-19 and the recession. I think what COVID-19 and this economic crisis have done is just highlight those problems and give them an opportunity to clear the deck. So I expect a lot of casualties. With regards to commercial real estate, there will be some. It's inevitable. But I think commercial real estate is incredibly resilient because it has the ability to reinvent itself. We've been talking for years in real estate about space as a service. We've been talking for years about operational excellence, about treating tenants like consumers as opposed to just people who passively use the building. If real estate doesn't want to change to meet those demands, then those companies will fail because they're not meeting the demands of the new market. With regards to workplace and workplace consultancy and designers, again, the challenge is, if you want to do the same work that you were doing pre-COVID-19, well, I would say expect to fail, because we're going into a drastically different world. If you are open to meeting those challenges and working with businesses to help them successfully navigate it, there's never going to be more opportunity than now, because there's never going to be so much change as now. So I don't think it's so much for real estate and workplace company specific, it's mentality specific. If you are approaching this with the right mindset and you're really engaged with what's happening in the market and what the future looks like, I think it's an incredible time to be in those professions, and there's a lot of success to be had.
Okay, and do you have any final comments on the real estate market in general and what's happening with that?
I think I mean, I've noticed the time, so I probably shouldn't go into a rant because I could do quite a long one about the real estate market in general. I think the real estate market has so much potential to have so much impact on people's lives. You know, we come to city centres or to work hubs, and we spend significant periods of our lives there. And there's significant amounts of money that are invested in them and that transact through them. And yet they don't really create ecosystems. They don't really engage with people who use them and enhance their lives, enhance like their buying potential in any way whatsoever. And for me, if real estate doesn't meet those challenges, we will see a lot of buildings become relatively redundant and a lot of traditional real estate companies become relatively redundant as well. So that's sort of almost my closing remark on real estate. It's what a time to actually reinvent what we do with something with a product that gets used by so many people on a daily basis.
Do you think that might, not to take away from that last and very meaningful point, but do you think that would entail introducing more residential properties in the mix of commercial properties, maybe creating sort of hybrid forms there? So they become more living spaces, more active sort of spaces in other ways.
I think planning sort of constraints aside to doing that, I think that the interior design of office space will start to become more residential in nature. What we had in the previous sort of design change was actually offices started to replicate restaurants and bars, places we would go for recreation, but not the home. Whereas I believe what will happen now is where people have become so accustomed to working from home, but also the different environments they can then work in, whether that's lounging, whether that's at a table, whether that's in quiet space, whether that's in a space where you can invite a small number of people in. That's where people seem to be most productive. That's where people seem to be most engaged when they have that flexibility. And the best way to create that is to replicate aspects of the home because they're aspects everyone understands and knows how to instantly adopt. So a sort of a prediction about it, something we've been working on for a number of years now anyway, is actually bringing in more elements to the home. One of the things we're doing at ThirdWay is we're actually close to finishing designing a studio flat in the office where someone can effectively just book it for an hour or for the day, and they can pretty much like work however they want to in there, but to create that environment and see how productive that is. And that's something I think that we'll end up creating multiple of those in our space, which means we'll need more space. It means we'll use it in different ways.
Nice. Okay. I think that's a good point to finish, but I think these are topics that we should continue to come back to as we move through the next few weeks and months as the situation evolves. So apologies for the connectivity issues to everyone, but thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.